The crowd had already formed by the time her knees finally gave way. Coins scattered across the marble pavement with a sharp, humiliating clatter, echoing far louder than they should have in the open-air plaza. A few rolled all the way to the polished shoes of the man standing in front of her, the beggar everyone knew, the one everyone ignored. The girl froze. Her breath hitched as laughter rippled through the small gathering of onlookers. "Oh, wow," a woman scoffed loudly, arms crossed. "Look at this." Now the jobless are donating to the homeless. A man in a crisp blazer snorted. "That's what happens when people don't know their place." The girl's face burned. She dropped to her knees instinctively, scrambling to collect the fallen coins with trembling fingers. Each one felt heavier than gold because she knew every single coin mattered. That was her bus fare, her dinner, her tomorrow. "Hey!" A sharp voice cut through the noise. She looked up slowly. Standing directly in front of her was the homeless beggar. Or at least that's what everyone believed he was. His clothes were worn, his coat frayed at the sleeves, his beard unkempt. He held out a weathered hand, not to take, but to help her up. But before she could even touch his fingers, "Stop!" The shout cracked through the air like a whip. A security guard pushed forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate. His eyes were filled with disgust, not toward the crowd, but toward the girl on the ground. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked. She swallowed. I dropped my money. I was just giving it away," the guard sneered. "To him." The crowd laughed again, louder this time. The beggar straightened slowly. His eyes were calm, unreadable. "She didn't do anything wrong," the guard scoffed. "You don't get to speak." He turned back to the girl, pointing sharply at the scattered coins. "Do you have any idea where you are? This is the Meridian Plaza. People like you don't belong here." The words hit her like a slap. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was just passing through." "Passing through?" a man from the crowd mocked. "With that outfit?" She glanced down at her faded jacket, the loose thread at the cuff she'd stitched herself. Her shoes were worn thin. She hadn't realized how visible her poverty was until this very moment. The security guard folded his arms. "Let me make this simple. Pick up your trash and leave, or I'll call the police." Her chest tightened. The beggar stepped forward again. "Officer, there's no need for that." The guard turned sharply, eyes blazing. "I said shut up." The sudden aggression made the girl flinch. "Don't you see?" The guard continued loudly, clearly enjoying the attention. "She's pathetic, no job, no future, and still pretending to be some kind of hero." The girl finally gathered the courage to look up. Her eyes shimmered, but her voice was steady. "I'm not pretending," she said softly. "I just didn't want him to go hungry." That should have ended it. Instead, it made everything worse. The guard laughed openly. "Hungry? You should worry about yourself." A woman in the crowd shook her head. "This is embarrassing, giving charity when you can't even afford your own life." The beggar clenched his jaw. "Enough!" That single word was quiet but firm. For just a moment something strange happened. The air shifted. The girl felt it before she understood it. A subtle change. The way the beggar stood straighter now. The way his eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the people around him, not like a victim, but like a man assessing a room. The guard noticed it too. "Oh," he sneered. "What are you going to do? Lecture us?" The beggar turned to the girl instead. "Why did you give me your money?" She hesitated, embarrassed. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible." The words landed like a punch to the chest. For a split second, the beggar's expression softened. Something almost like pain flashed across his face. The guard rolled his eyes. "Spare us the poetry." He reached for his radio. "That's it, I'm calling this in." "No," the girl said suddenly, panic rising. She stood up shakily. "Please don't, I'll leave, I promise." She bent down again, desperate to gather the last few coins, but the guard stepped forward and kicked one away. The coin skidded across the ground. The crowd gasped. "Oops," the guard said coldly. "Clumsy me." The girl stared at the coin rolling out of reach. Her hands shook violently now. Beggar's eyes darkened. He turned slowly toward the guard. "Do you have any idea," he said calmly, "who you're humiliating right now?" The guard burst out laughing. "Do you?" The crowd joined in. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, fighting tears, and then a black luxury car pulled up silently at the edge of the plaza. No one noticed at first. The argument continued, voices rising, cruelty thick in the air, until the car door opened. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, followed by another and another. Their movements were sharp, disciplined. Their eyes locked immediately onto the beggar. The laughter began to fade. One by one, heads turned. The security guard frowned. "What the?" The suited man walked straight past him and stopped. Right in front of the beggar, he bowed his head respectfully. "Sir," he said, voice firm and clear. "We've been looking for you." Silence fell like a hammer. The girl's eyes snapped open. The guard's face drained of color. The crowd froze. The beggar closed his eyes briefly, as if disappointed. Then he opened them again, And in that moment, every single person standing there felt it. They had made a terrible mistake. They mocked a jobless girl for her kindness. They humiliated her for giving her last coins away. But none of them had any idea who that homeless beggar truly was. The camera lingers on the guard's trembling hands, the girl's stunned expression, and the beggar, now standing like a king among fools. And when the truth comes out, this plaza will never be the same again. Have you ever been judged or humiliated just because of how you looked or what you had? Tell us your story in the comments and let us know where you're watching from today. But before we see how this ends, let's go back to where this story truly began 3 weeks earlier. The alarm rang at 5:12 a.m., sharp and unforgiving. Aisha didn't hit snooze. She never did. Her eyes opened slowly in the half-darkness of the tiny room, the peeling paint on the ceiling already familiar, already counted like cracks in a map she knew by heart. The room was barely large enough to hold a narrow bed, a second-hand table, and a suitcase that served as her closet. A single window looked out over a concrete wall, letting in more noise than light. She sat up quietly, careful not to wake the neighbor on the other side of the thin wall. Her phone buzzed again, not the alarm this time, but a notification. Application status rejected. She stared at the screen. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she exhaled, slow, controlled, practiced. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay, next one. This was rejection number 47. Aisha swung her feet onto the cold floor and stood, stretching her aching back. 24 years old, college graduate, top of her class in accounting, and unemployed for 8 months. She washed her face in the tiny sink, staring at her reflection, dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. No makeup, there was no point wasting what little she had. Still, she smiled at herself. Today will be different, she said, even though she didn't quite believe it. Outside, the city was already awake. Buses groaned, vendors shouted. People hurried past with purpose, briefcases, uniforms, destinations. Aisha walked among them, holding a folder tight against her chest like a shield. Inside were printed resumes, carefully aligned, edges crisp despite being printed on the cheapest paper available. She stopped at a street stall and hesitated. The vendor looked up. Tea. She checked her wallet discreetly. 3 crumpled bills, a handful of coins. She shook her head politely. Maybe later. The vendor nodded, already turning to the next customer. Aisha continued walking. She'd learned to calculate everything, every step, every expense, every risk. If she bought tea now, she might not have enough for the bus home. If she walked instead, she could save money, but arrive tired, sweaty, less presentable. She chose to walk, again. Her first interview was at 9:00 a.m. a mid-sized firm. Good reputation, entry-level position. Perfect. She sat in the waiting area, hands folded neatly in her lap, rehearsing answers in her head. Tell us about a challenge you overcame. Why should we hire you? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? The receptionist barely looked at her when she checked in. At 9:27, a man called her name. The interview lasted 7 minutes. 7. The interviewer glanced at her resume, nodded absently, and said, "We'll be in touch." She knew what that meant. Still, she said thank you. Still, she smiled. By noon, she had walked to 3 more offices. 2 turned her away without even taking her resume. 1 accepted it reluctantly. By 2:00 p.m., her feet ached. By 3:00 p.m., her stomach growled. She sat on a bench near the Meridian Plaza, pulling out her wallet again. She counted the money carefully, enough for a bus ride, barely, not enough for food. She closed the wallet and slipped it back into her bag. Hunger won't kill me, she murmured. Missing a chance might. Aisha wasn't always like this. There was a time, just 2 years ago, when her life felt possible. Her father had been alive then. He used to sit at the kitchen table late at night, helping her study. You're going to do great things, he'd say, tapping her books. Not because of money, because of who you are. When he passed suddenly from a heart attack, everything changed. Medical bills swallowed their savings. Her mother took a job in another city to survive. Aisha stayed behind, determined to finish school. She did, graduated with honors, but life didn't clap. Life didn't care. As the afternoon wore on, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. Aisha stood across the street from the Meridian Plaza, staring at the towering glass structure. Luxury cars glided in and out. People laughed inside cafes she couldn't afford. This wasn't on her list, but something pulled her there. She checked her phone. One last notification blinked at the top of the screen. Final notice, rent due today. Her heart sank. If she didn't pay by tonight, she'd have 3 days before eviction proceedings began. 3 days, she closed her eyes. Just breathe, she told herself. Just breathe. She crossed the street. Near the entrance, sitting quietly on the edge of the plaza, was a homeless man. He didn't shout, he didn't beg, he just sat there holding a simple cardboard sign. Anything helps, God bless. People walked past him like he was invisible. Aisha slowed. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he sat, calm, dignified. Maybe it was the tired intelligence in his eyes. Or maybe it was because, for the first time that day, she saw someone who looked like they were carrying a heavier burden than her own. She reached into her bag. Her fingers touched her wallet. She hesitated. You need that money. Her mind screamed logic. You need food. You need rent. You need a future. She looked at the man again. His coat was thin. The air was cold. Without another thought, she knelt down. She pulled out her wallet and emptied it. Bills, coins, everything. She placed it gently into his cup. There, she said softly, forcing a smile. At least one of us shouldn't go hungry today. The man looked up at her, stunned. Miss, he began. You don't have to. It's okay, she interrupted. Really? She stood quickly, embarrassed. She didn't notice the people staring. She didn't notice the security guard approaching. She didn't notice how the man's hands trembled, not from cold, but from something much deeper. She only noticed one thing as she turned away. For the first time all day, her chest felt lighter. Aisha didn't know it then, but that single act of kindness born from her lowest moment was about to change her life forever. And as fate would have it, that day was far from over. Aisha had taken no more than 3 steps away from the plaza when it happened. Hey! The shout snapped through the air, sharp and authoritative. She stopped instantly. Slowly, she turned around. The security guard was striding toward her, radio clipped to his shoulder, jaw clenched like he'd already decided she was guilty of something. His name badge glinted in the sunlight, Mark Rollins. Behind him, a few pedestrians slowed, curiosity blooming on their faces. Conflict was entertainment here. Yes, Aisha asked quietly. Mark looked her up and down, taking his time. Her worn shoes, her faded jacket, the cheap backpack slung over one shoulder. What do you think you're doing? He demanded. I was just leaving, she replied. Not before you explain why you're loitering and giving money to vagrants on private property. Her cheeks flushed. I wasn't loitering, I was just helping. Mark laughed, short and humorless. Helping with what? Encouraging him to stay? The homeless man looked up from his seat. Officer, she did nothing wrong. Mark ignored him completely. You people always think you're heroes, he continued loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. But all you're doing is making things worse. Aisha clenched her hands together. It was my money. Mark stepped closer, too close. Money you clearly can't afford to give away. A couple walking past slowed to watch. A woman whispered to her friend, why would someone like her give money to a beggar? Her friend smirked. Probably trying to feel important. Aisha's heart pounded. I didn't mean any trouble, she said softly. I'll go. She turned again. Mark blocked her path. Hold on, he said. You think you can just cause a scene and walk away? I didn't cause a scene, she whispered. You're causing one right now. The homeless man stood up. That simple movement changed the dynamic. He wasn't tall, but there was something commanding in the way he rose, slow, deliberate, steady. His eyes were sharp now, focused. She's leaving, he said calmly. Let her go. Mark finally turned on him, irritated. Sit down. No, the word was quiet, firm. The crowd murmured. Mark scoffed. Excuse me. She gave because she wanted to, the man continued. And you're humiliating her for it. Mark laughed again, louder this time. Humiliating her? Look at her. Aisha's throat tightened. She humiliated herself the moment she decided to play savior, Mark added. Something inside Aisha cracked. I didn't do it to be a savior, she said, her voice trembling but audible. I did it because I know what it feels like to be ignored. Mark raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah, and what do you know about hardship? The question was meant to wound, and it did. My father died, she said quietly. I've been looking for work for months. I haven't eaten today, but I'm still luckier than some people. Silence rippled through the crowd. For half a second, no one spoke. Then a man near the cafe laughed uncomfortably. That's sad, but still not smart. Mark seized on it. Exactly, charity starts at home, sweetheart. The homeless man's fists clenched. That's enough, he said. Mark rounded on him. You don't get to decide what's enough. He grabbed his radio. This is security, he said into it. We've got a disturbance, possible panhandling violation. Aisha's eyes widened. Please don't call the police. Mark smirked. Why not? Afraid they'll see who you really are? She shook her head. I just want to leave. Mark lowered his voice, leaning in. You should have thought of that before embarrassing yourself. The crowd had grown now. Phones were out. Whispers buzzed. The homeless man stepped between them. If you're calling anyone, he said evenly, call them for me. Mark blinked. What? The man met his gaze without flinching. Because this ends now. Mark burst out laughing. You're hilarious, a beggar issuing threats. Aisha reached out instinctively. Please don't. The man glanced at her, his expression softened. "I'm sorry you're going through this," he said gently. Mark snorted. "Don't apologize to her, she chose this." He gestured around. "Look, folks, this is what happens when people don't know their place." That's when he kicked the coin. The metallic sound echoed sharply as it skidded across the marble. Aisha gasped. She dropped to her knees without thinking, crawling to retrieve it. The humiliation was complete. Laughter erupted. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. The homeless man's face hardened. He turned slowly toward Mark. "Do you enjoy this?" he asked. Mark shrugged. "I enjoy order." "You call this order?" the man asked quietly. Before Mark could respond, a sleek black sedan rolled silently to the curb. At first, no one noticed. Then the engine cut off. The rear door opened. A man stepped out, then another, both in tailored suits, both scanning the area with sharp, assessing eyes. The murmuring stopped. Mark frowned. "What's going on now?" One of the suited men spotted the homeless man. His posture changed instantly. He walked forward quickly. The crowd parted instinctively. Aisha looked up from the ground, confused. The man stopped directly in front of the beggar and bowed his head. "Sir," he said respectfully, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we've been trying to reach you all day." The plaza went dead silent. Mark's mouth fell open. Aisha froze. The homeless man closed his eyes slowly. When he opened them again, he wasn't homeless anymore. He was powerful. And in that moment, the truth stood inches away from being revealed, a truth that would turn humiliation into horror and kindness into destiny. The silence was unbearable. It pressed down on the plaza like a physical weight, crushing laughter, swallowing whispers, freezing every person in place. "Sir," Mark repeated weakly. No one answered him. All eyes were locked on the suited man standing in front of the so-called homeless beggar, his head still bowed in unmistakable respect. Aisha remained on her knees, one hand clutching the coin Mark had kicked away. Her fingers trembled so badly the metal rattled against the marble. "Sir, we've been trying to reach you all day." Her mind couldn't process it. The suited man straightened and spoke again, his voice firm, professional, reverent. "The board meeting has been waiting for 2 hours," he said. "They refused to begin without you." A ripple went through the crowd. "Board meeting," Mark let out a nervous laugh. "Hey, look, I think there's been some kind of mistake." The homeless man finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, authoritative. "There's no mistake." He slowly removed his worn coat. The gesture was simple, but it felt ceremonial. Underneath, he wore a perfectly tailored suit, dark, immaculate, not new but timeless. The kind of suit that didn't shout wealth because it didn't need to. Gasps erupted. Phones dropped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Mark staggered back a step. "What the hell is this?" The man turned toward him fully now and smiled, not kindly. "Mark Rowlands," he said evenly. "Head of Plaza Security, 5 years, no formal complaints until today." Mark's face drained of color. How do you know my name?" he stammered. The man glanced at the suited executive beside him. "I read reports." Then he looked back at Mark. "After all," he continued calmly, "this is my property." The world seemed to stop. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. His property. The suited man stepped forward and addressed the crowd clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "allow me to formally introduce Mr. Elias Grant, founder and majority owner of the Meridian Group." A wave of shock slammed through the plaza. The Meridian Group, hotels, plazas, corporations, a global empire. One woman covered her mouth. A man whispered, "That's impossible." Mark looked like he was about to faint. I don't understand," he babbled. You looked homeless," Elias finished for him. "Yes," Mark croaked. Elias nodded. "That was intentional." He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the stunned crowd. "I conduct unannounced visits to my properties," he said calmly. "Not as a billionaire, not as an executive, but as a human being." His eyes hardened. "To see how people are treated when they think no one important is watching." A murmur of horror rippled through the bystanders. Elias turned back to Aisha. She was still kneeling. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with confusion and disbelief. "Please," he said gently. "Stand up." She hesitated. He extended his hand, the same hand she'd almost taken earlier. This time she accepted it. As he helped her to her feet, the crowd watched in stunned silence. "You gave me everything you had," Elias said quietly. "Without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return." Aisha swallowed hard. "I just didn't want you to be hungry." His jaw tightened. "For the record," he said, raising his voice slightly, "she offered kindness when she had nothing." He turned sharply to Mark. "And you offered cruelty while standing on power you didn't earn." Mark shook his head frantically. "Sir, please, I didn't know. If I had known—" "That's the problem," Elias snapped, his voice cut like ice. "You didn't know, and because you didn't know, you felt entitled to humiliate her." Mark's knees buckled. I was just doing my job, he pleaded. Elias stared at him. No, he said, you were enjoying it. The suited executive stepped forward. Mr. Grant, security footage has already been flagged. Multiple witnesses. The legal team is on standby. Mark looked around wildly. The crowd that had laughed earlier now avoided his eyes. Aisha felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. Elias turned to her again. Miss, he said softly, what is your name? Aisha, she whispered. Aisha, he repeated as if committing it to memory. You changed the course of this day. She shook her head. I didn't do anything special. Elias smiled sadly. That's what makes it extraordinary. He turned back to the executive. Cancel the board meeting. The man blinked. Sir, I have more important business, Elias said. Then he faced Mark one final time. You're terminated, he said calmly. Effective immediately. Mark collapsed onto a bench. Additionally, Elias continued, charges will be filed for harassment, abuse of authority, and discrimination. The words hit like gunshots. The crowd erupted into stunned whispers. Aisha's legs felt weak. Elias noticed and gently guided her to sit. I'm sorry you went through that, he said quietly. No one should be shamed for compassion. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I thought being kind didn't matter anymore, she said. Elias' eyes glistened. It matters more than you know. He stood and addressed the crowd one last time. Let this be a lesson, he said firmly. Character is revealed when power thinks it's unseen. No one spoke. No one dared. The plaza that once echoed with laughter now held only shame. In a single moment, the powerless became protected, the arrogant were exposed, and a girl with nothing but a good heart stood face to face with a billionaire who would never forget her kindness. But the story wasn't over yet, not even close. The plaza didn't erupt into applause. It couldn't. The air was too heavy for celebration. Mark Rowland sat slumped on the bench, his radio hanging uselessly at his side. The same radio he'd used minutes earlier to threaten a girl who couldn't afford lunch. Now it crackled quietly, unanswered, irrelevant, just like his authority. 2 additional security supervisors arrived, summoned by the executive. They stood stiffly, eyes wide, clearly trying to understand how their coworker had just destroyed his own career. Escort him off the premises, the executive said calmly. Mark looked up, desperation etched across his face. Please, I have a family. Elias met his gaze without anger. So did she? He said quietly, nodding toward Aisha. And you didn't hesitate. Mark's shoulders sagged. The supervisors gently but firmly guided him away. The crowd parted in silence, watching the man who once stood tall now shrink with every step. Justice didn't shout. It walked. Aisha remained seated, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart was still racing. She felt like she might wake up at any second. Elias sat across from her, resting his elbows on his knees, not like a billionaire, but like a man having an honest conversation. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded. Why didn't you keep even a little for yourself? She hesitated. Because if I started calculating who deserved help, I might talk myself out of helping at all. Elias closed his eyes briefly. That's the answer I was afraid of, he said softly. Afraid? She asked. That people like you are becoming rare. A staff member approached hesitantly. Sir, the press is outside. Elias shook his head. They can wait. He turned back to Aisha. What were you doing here today? She laughed weakly. Looking for work. Elias raised an eyebrow. What kind? I studied accounting, she said. Graduated top of my class. The executive beside him inhaled sharply. Sir, he murmured, we have 3 junior analyst positions unfilled. Elias nodded slowly. Aisha, he said, would you be willing to come upstairs and talk? Her eyes widened. I don't have an appointment, he smiled. You never needed one. Inside the Meridian Tower, everything felt surreal. The marble floors, the glass elevators, the people stepping aside respectfully as Elias passed. Aisha kept her hands clenched, afraid to touch anything. They entered a conference room overlooking the city. Elias gestured for her to sit. He placed a file in front of her. What's this? She asked. A contract, he replied. A job offer. Her breath caught. I haven't interviewed. You've already shown me more than a resume ever could. Tears welled in her eyes. But, he added gently, there's more. He slid another document forward. Your rent, he said, paid for the next year. She stared at the paper, shaking her head. I can't accept that. Yes, you can, he said firmly. Not as charity, as restitution. Her voice broke. Why are you doing this? Elias leaned back, eyes distant. Years ago, he said quietly, I was where you are now, broke. Invisible, one woman helped me when she had nothing. He paused. She saved my life. Aisha wiped her tears. What happened to her? Elias smiled sadly. I never found her. Silence settled between them, then Aisha took a deep breath. I promise, she said, I won't waste this. Elias nodded. I know. By sunset, the story had already spread. Videos of the confrontation flooded social media. The comments were relentless. Justice served. Kindness wins. Fire him again. But Elias wasn't finished. That evening, an internal memo went out across the Meridian group. Effective immediately, all staff will undergo mandatory empathy and ethics training. Any abuse of authority will result in immediate termination. Kindness is not optional, it is policy. Aisha read it on her phone, stunned. She looked up at Elias. You changed everything. He shook his head. You did. Later that night, as she prepared to leave, Elias handed her an envelope. What's this? Your first paycheck, he said, plus something extra. She hesitated. I don't need more, he smiled. It's not for you. Inside was a check made out to a local homeless shelter. Her eyes filled again. You can decide where it goes, he said. I trust your judgment. Aisha nodded, overwhelmed. As she stepped out into the evening air, the city felt different, warmer, kinder, because for the first time in a long time, someone had seen her. The arrogant lost everything. The kind gained a future. And a single act of compassion rewrote the rules for everyone watching. But the true ending was still waiting. 1 year later, morning sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of a high-rise apartment, glinting off polished floors and neatly arranged furniture. The city stretched endlessly beyond the balcony, alive and breathing, just like the woman standing there now. Aisha adjusted the strap of her watch and checked the time. 7:30 a.m. She smiled. Some habits never changed. The apartment was modest by luxury standards, but to her it was everything. Clean, quiet, safe. A place where the refrigerator was never empty and eviction notices no longer haunted her sleep. She picked up her phone. Reminder, shelter donation, visit 10:00 a.m. Her smile deepened. At Meridian Group headquarters, the atmosphere had changed. Employees greeted each other by name. Security officers nodded respectfully to everyone who passed. No profiling, no sneers, no power games. A plaque now stood at the entrance. Character is revealed when power thinks it's unseen. Aisha walked through the lobby with confidence, not arrogance, not entitlement, just quiet certainty. She wasn't invisible anymore, but more importantly, she hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be. Inside a bright conference room, Elias Grant watched the city from above. He heard the door open and turned. Aisha, he said, smiling. Good morning, she replied warmly. They sat across from each other, papers spread neatly on the table. You've exceeded every projection, Elias said. The board is impressed. Aisha chuckled softly. I just do the work. That, he said, is exactly why you belong here. There was a comfortable silence between them now, one built on respect, not obligation. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Elias looked at her. Regret what? That day, sitting outside. Being treated that way. He considered the question. No, he said finally, because it reminded me why I built everything in the first place. He leaned forward. And you? She thought for a moment. No, she said, because it showed me who I wanted to become. Across town, Mark Rowlands woke to an alarm he hated, a cheap one. He sat up slowly in his small apartment, rubbing his face. The job applications on his table were unanswered. His name was still whispered online, sometimes mocked, sometimes forgotten. He worked night shifts now, different uniform, less power. Every day he passed people like Aisha once was, and every day he looked away. At the homeless shelter, Aisha knelt beside an elderly woman, listening intently. She didn't rush, she didn't lecture, she helped. A reporter watched quietly from the corner. Why do you do this? The reporter asked. Aisha smiled. Because someone once treated me like I mattered when I thought I didn't. That evening, Elias stood again at the plaza. The same spot, different energy. People moved with purpose. Kindness wasn't rare here anymore, it was expected. Aisha joined him. Funny how places remember, she said. Elias nodded. So do people. They stood in silence as the city lights flickered on. A girl with no job but a full heart changed her destiny by giving everything she had. A billionaire rediscovered his humanity by being treated like no one. And a world that watched learned a lesson it would never forget. Never judge someone by what they appear to have. Kindness given without expectation is the most powerful currency in the world. And sometimes the smallest act can open the biggest doors. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, inspirational stories. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind the world kindness still matters.